Hi, I'm Aaron, Manager of Engineering here at Central Alabama Electric Cooperative, and we get a lot of questions about how we restore power and our methods and what we kind of go through to get your power back on. So I was going to go through the various steps on what we do. The very first thing we have to look at is the transmission that actually feeds our substations. All of our substations are physically connected to Alabama Power's transmission system. Now those transmission lines and poles are equally as susceptible to high winds and trees falling down as our distribution is. So we are in coordination with Alabama Power on actually them getting the transmission lines back up in the air so that power can be connected back to our substations. And so once the transmission's connected to our substations, then we can take it from there and begin our restoration process on our side. So then we can begin focusing on our substations themselves. If we've had the high side protective device open, then we actually have to physically go to the substation and see what's going on. If we've lost communications completely with the substation, we have to send somebody to the substation and see what's going on, basically so we can get eyes and see what's going on. Now, if we've lost communications, we'll have our IT and engineering groups working in the background to try to restore communications so that we can have visibility in our dispatch center of what's going on in our substations. Now once the linemen get there to the substations, they're looking for any kind of damage, anything that's going on, anything that could have opened up that protective device. Once we're satisfied that everything's good in the substation, if there is damage, we have to repair it. But if we're satisfied that everything's good, then we can go ahead and energize the substation. Once the substation is energized, then we can move on to the next part of our restoration, which is working on our main feeder lines. Once we get all 24 substations up, we can begin focusing on the feeders. Now we're doing this simultaneously. If the substation's already up, we can immediately go and start focusing on the feeders. Now, in our 24 substations, we have 75 feeders that need to be ridden out and looked at. And some feeders are short as 1-2 miles, and some feeders are as long as 20 miles. It's just depending on the feeder. Now, we start at the substation. There's no priority given to any one person. The priority is given by first transmission, like I mentioned, then substation, now feeders. And then once feeders, then the priority switches to the taps, which we'll get into in the next segment. If they come to a section and it's all clear, then they can open up the next downline device and then re-energize that section. If there's something affecting the very first section of line out of the substation, then they have to get that section up first before they can even move to the next section. So we get through the main feeders. Once the main feeders are energized, then we can move on to the tap lines. Now, if you hear us say three-phase, that's what we're talking about in the main feeders. The main feeders, it could go along main roads, but a lot of our feeders actually go cross country through wooded areas. We're going through locked gates, trees down, blocking the roads. So it's a long process just getting the main feeders ridden out. But once we have the main feeders, then we can come back and start working on the tap lines. Now, tap lines are used to actually get power off the main feeders into the neighborhoods, down your street, or might not even be down your street. It might be through the woods to get to where your street is. So the tap lines take it from the main feeders and go actually further closer to your home from the main feeder. Now, tap lines can be three-phase or single-phase, so you'll see a mixture of both out there. As we're looking at it, if we see just the line's good, like if a tree just brushed up against it, then we can re-energize it right then. If when we're looking at it and the wire's torn down, then we actually have to send a crew, a bucket truck, to actually go put that up. If as we're looking at it, we see a pole's down, pole's broke, we see pole's broken, then we actually have to send a construction crew back out. So the different crews that come out, we're not necessarily going to restore the first tap out of the substation first. And in that order, we restore in the damage and as the crews get there. So your tap might not get on depending upon the damage as we restore the tap. So the priority is not done by persons, by people, by members. The priority is done by getting the crews out there, what we see and what we go, and we work from the subs out, and then even getting the crews to some of these locations. You'll see, if you've seen pictures of bulldozers, we actually have to bulldoze a way in to kind of get some of these taps back up in the air. And we might have one tap that might have 100 people on it, and we might have one tap that takes 4 hours to get up, but then we only re-energize 4 people. But it's still a lot of work, all the same amount of work. We don't prioritize it based on the number of people. We're just going out from the substations and out. So once we're done with the tap lines, then we can start focusing on the actual services. If your service didn't have any damage, typically you'll come back on when the feeder's on, the substation's back on, or the tap line's back on. But if your service did have damage, say if you had a tree fall across your service, tear your service across from your house or something like that, then typically we would have come out and disconnected that so that you can make repairs. Once you make repairs, we can't just stop getting the tap lines up or getting the feeders up to come and reattach to your house. So that actually come toward the end of the process is when we'll be able to send somebody back out to reconnect you. Now, some other questions we get is you might think that you're on a tap all by yourself. You could be by yourself, but a lot of times you're actually out with all of your neighbors as well. So we might energize a tap and bring on 20 people, might bring on a big tap, energize 100 people, that kind of thing. So another thing, you might have your power on. Your power may have stayed on the entire time the storm hit. And then all of a sudden your power goes out like a day into it or a few hours into it. Well, what's happening there is we found a hazardous condition, and we have to de-energize the line to clear up that hazardous condition or repair that hazardous condition. Some of the other things you might see is, I mentioned before earlier in the video, where we'll come to a certain point, and if we can open up the line at a certain point and get these people back on, we'll do that. But then in order to reconnect that line, sometimes we'll have to take your power back out to make that connection and then bring you back on. It might take an hour, might just take a few minutes. So those are some of the other things that you might experience when we're out there. And if you have questions about the trucks that I've referenced in this video, about the different trucks you might see and what their purpose is, you can check out our other video that we have on our Facebook page as well.